Okay. Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. I want to give a little brief sikum, or a summary of where we're holding, and to also give you a little bit of encouragement as we start tonight's class. The encouragement being that I did hear from at least a couple of people offline that they're confused and what's going on. So the confusion is part of the issue, actually, to be honest. It's not in hopefully the way it's being taught, but it's in the way the book is presented at the beginning. He does the Admor Zaken does not purposely start the book confusing, but he wants us to be awoken, woken up, and with throwing a lot of different things at us at the very beginning, which included many questions. First were the definitions. What is a Rasha, Benoni, and Tzaddik? He gave us, for the moment, a peek, a glimpse at how he describes Tzaddikim and Benonim and Rishayim. We really won't see until Perek Yud Gimel, way down the road, what these definitions are. And to be honest, it doesn't make a tremendous difference at this point. It will later. It's important to note that we cannot, and he also said it cannot define, for the purposes of this book, we cannot define a Benoni as chetzi, like half zechuyot, half good and half not good. And we said that the word Benoni, we said in Tzaddik especially, is in Shem Mushal. What did that mean? It means, let's say we look at a person and say the person gets a duck and they go to shul and they help the poor and they stay extra time and help everybody and they learn, oh, what a Tzaddik. That terminology is used, it's thrown around, but we're talking about a Tzaddik in the true sense of the way he is trying to describe it. We come to a very different point. And the Tzaddik that he refers to is a person that not only has completely filled only in doing mitzvot and no averot, but also has somehow been able to eradicate his Yetzer Hara completely. Again, how is that possible? What is this going to do for us? We'll see way down the road. And also he said that a tzaddik cannot be just the fact that he has majority of mitzvot in his life and minority of averot. We can't say that, because if that were the case, then why would it be that he ends up where we left off last week, saying that Hashem saw that Kivayachol saw that there were very, very few tzaddikim, and in every generation he planted a few tzaddikim. We know there are plenty of people that we would look at that every one of us has in our mind. Could probably come up with 25, 30 people off the top of your head that we say, oh, such a tzaddik that person is, or tzaddikas. So it can't be, he says, the colloquial definition that we have of a tzaddik. And of course, like I say, we're still left with many questions. We have the contradictions that we mentioned. We have the definitions. We have Eov, who said, how come you created tzaddikim and rishayim, which we know goes against everything we believe in when it comes to bechira chofshit, of free choice. So I mentioned to you last week that when we got to this point, I'm going to show you now. I put I added the text into the slides for the screen share, so it just will flow hopefully better this evening, because I felt it was too choppy last time. We're going to start right here at these two dots. Well, we said that until we got to those two dots, from the first word of the book, Tanya, until these two dots, was pretty much the mechanical introduction to Tanya, where he presented all the different questions, the different definitions, how it can and cannot be seen, and some of these contradictions that I mentioned. Starting with these two dots, where it says, Ach biur ha'inyan, which I'll read in a moment. The next few lines, I would consider the basis and the foundation for the entire book of Tanya. Meaning, what we did until now were some mechanics. And I don't mean chas v'chalila to minimize what's been done until now, but it's mechanics. It's stating certain facts and certain contradictions and certain questions. Now he's going to lay the groundwork for the entire rest of the book. And you will not necessarily remember it now, but when we get to the very, very end of Tanya, Bezrat Hashem, chapter 53, he's going to connect. It doesn't mean you have to wait to the end to hear all your answers. They'll come along the way. But we're going to come full circle to this next two lines when we finish the book down the road. I'm going to read a couple lines, and we have some discussion we need to have before we can really understand the next lines that come after that. So let's take a look. So remember we said until now we've had some issues of what exactly these questions are, the definitions are, these contradictions. He tells us as follows. Now, for those of you who have your own copy, again, we're still in chapter 1 in Perek Aleph, and I think it's like one of the very first set of 2 dots in the chapter. One of the difficulties that people come across learning Tanya, similar to Gemara, well, the Gemara is more difficult for those who have trouble with Aramaic, is that there really is very little in the way of punctuation in the book, in the original printing of the book. This is basically the original way it was printed, and it is promulgated this way. Most times when you see translations or commentary, very often the facing page will have this original printing. So there are very few commas and quotes, and there are no quote marks. And there are 2 dots here and there. So from the 2 dots, bi'ur ha'inyan, the understanding, the way we're going to explain this whole, begin to explain this whole situation. Al pi ma shekatav Rav Chaim Vital zichrono livracha bishar hakedusha uve'etz Chaim shar gimel perek bet. He's quoting now a source. Rav Chaim Vital was one of the major Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, as we mentioned before, never wrote anything. It was all verbal. And Rav Chaim Vital, for the most part, is one who wrote down a lot of what he taught, of what the Baal Shem Tov taught. And in Shar HaKedusha, which is an Eitz Chaim, Shar Gimel, Perek Bet, he wrote as follows. Delechol ish Yisrael, echad tzadik, ve'echad rasha. To every Jew, whether he's a tzaddik or a rasha, and again, leave the definitions off to the side now, yeshte nishamot. They have 2 nishamot. We have 2 nishamot. Dichtiv, for it says, unishamot ani asiti, and nishamot I made. Shehen shtei nefashot. That they are now. He's going to use these words now interchangeably, even though we'll see later they're not. Nishamot and nefashot. We're just going to use them interchangeably. And his statement is as follows: in order to begin to understand what is the understanding, how we're going to understand all these definitions and move forward, is we have to start from a premise. And that premise is that every Jew has 2 nishamot. Now, he's not talking about, let's dispel one idea. He's not talking about your regular neshama and your neshama yetera, the one you get on Shabbat. We're not talking about that. What is it he's talking about? So what we need to start with is a little background and definitions and understanding. He calls these 2 nishamot, which we'll see, the nefesh abahamit and nefesh elokit, loosely translated as the animal soul and the godly soul. These 2 terms are going to accompany us throughout this book. Again, that's why it's so important for me to do this slowly so you understand what we're talking about. The nefesh elokit, the godly soul, and the nefesh bahamit, the animal soul. What does that sound like to you, though? What does that sound like? What does it remind you of anything?
Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Ra.
Right. It's exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like a Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Ra. So remember, I told you that we are dealing with Rav Chaim Vital. Rav Chaim Vital, one of the brilliant geniuses, Kabbalists, and whatever else terms you want to put him, we needed him to tell us we have a Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Ra. We already know that. The Gemara talks about it. We have had this tremendous literature on the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Ra. So what is this chidush? What is he telling us? So let's try to make some order out of this, and then we're going to look at a couple of slides. First of all, let's discuss Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. What are they? How would we define the word Yetzer? Yetzer is an inclination. So for example, there's a piece of chocolate cake that I want to eat. I have a Yetzer Hara, in quotes, that says, I want to eat that chocolate cake. Why is it a Yetzer Hara? Because it's not good for me. I don't have a problem with sugar, but let's just say I have a problem with sugar and it's not good for me. So I have a Yetzer Hara to eat it. A Yetzer Tov says, don't be a fool, stay away from it because otherwise it could hurt you. Let's go with the halacha. I have a Yetzer Hara, I don't. Let's just say I have a Yetzer Hara on Shabbat. I want to go on my phone and just check to see the news. That's my Yetzer Hara. My Yetzer Tov says, no, that's not the right thing to do. But it's just me, right? It's this discussion or is this battle between my Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara for me, just for me. What Rav Chaim Vital is telling us is that we have two neshamot and there are two me's. Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara is one topic that applies to the nefesh bahamit. I'm going to explain all these terms in a minute. Yetzer and the nefesh elokit is a different category. Let's talk about what these things all mean. The Yetzer, the nefesh ha-behamit, I'm going to generally translate, as like I said, as the animal soul. It sounds negative, it sounds terrible, it sounds bad. It means everything I just want, and I'll do what I want. It's what an animal does, but it's not what it means at all. The animal soul is the things that I want and do, is the drive in me, the neshama in me, that I want and I do for me, for selfish reasons. I want to eat. I want to sleep. It also is for things that I'm not supposed to do. My Yetzer Tov, my Yetzer Hara are found within my neshama ha-behamit. Neshama bahamit is not a bad thing per se. It's just not the godly soul. It is surrounded and focused more on me, what I need to do, what I want to do, whether it's a good desire or not a good desire. That's all found in the nefesh bahamit. We're going to see that in a few minutes in the text. What's the nefesh elokit? The nefesh elokit is a neshama in me that is godly. We will see, what does that mean? That's chapter 2 will deal with that. Chapter 2 will deal with the neshama that's in me, that is a chelek elokah memal, a piece of God, which we'll see what that means in the next chapter. And only thing that neshama wants is to connect to Hashem. Has absolutely no other drive, no other Yetzer Hara, no Yetzer Tov, no anything. It wants to connect to God. Both of those are in me. It is also necessary, as was pointed out to me in a message just now, that our nefesh bahamit we need for survival. Because if we didn't have the drive for sleep and for eating, for example, we wouldn't survive. So our nefesh bahamit is also known as the nefesh hachiyunit, which is our essential soul. We're going to get to all these terms, but I want to make sure it's very clear that when we talk about Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, they are a subset within the neshama or the nefesh ha-behamit. So picture it like this. I'm going to show you on the screen in a minute. You have the nefesh ha-behamit, which in it has Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. I need the nefesh ha-behamit to survive, but within the nefesh ha-behamit, I also have good and bad drives. The nefesh elokit on the other side is a different me. It's another me. And in that me, the only desire within there of that neshama is to reconnect with Hashem. Now that sounds like, okay, so you need 2 little pages. Tell me those pieces of information. I'm good to go. So what does he need 53 chapters? Obviously that'll become a little bit more clear in a few minutes, in a few months, over the next few months. The book of Tanya is not about a struggle between good and evil. The book of Tanya is the struggle between the selfish me, the nefesh ha-behamit, and the godly me, the nefesh ha-elokit. I'm going to say that again because it's critical to understand this book. We will obviously be talking about Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, but begadol, in very broad terms, the book of Tanya is not about how to control your Yetzer Hara. You want that? There are other books for that. It is not about good and evil in yourself. It is not about that struggle. It is about struggle, but a very different one. Your nefesh ha-behamit versus your nefesh elokit. There are positive traits, as I said, in the nefesh ha-behamit. We'll see that this evening. We will not touch on nefesh elokit tonight, and probably will middle of next class, Bezrat Hashem. So let's take a look. Yeah, screen sharing is off right now. It's going to be back on in a minute. Actually now, because I want to go to something else first before we look at that. Okay. Oh, that's not it. Okay. There is another term we need to know, a couple of terms before we continue reading. If you'll notice, before I even read, I'm going to read all this inside in a minute, but it's important to some people process differently. And I'm very well aware of that. I am one of those people. I like to be explain it to me and then look it inside. Some people just let me read it. So that's why I do both. So let me just tell you a couple more terms. Two terms that are used interchangeably, and both of which you probably have heard somewhere along the way. The word right here that says klipa and sitra achra. Okay, klipa is a shell or a husk. Sitra achra literally just means the other side. So I want to explain to you these terms before we move forward. And I'm going to show you examples. The world is divided into two things. I'm talking about the spiritual world is divided into two things. Very simply, Kiddusha, holiness, and everything else. That's it. Either something is there as serving Hashem, bringing Kedusha to the world, bringing Or, light to the world, or it's not. For example, if I take a look at this plastic cup, do you see Kedusha there? In itself, as it appears now. Don't tell me I can make Kiddush with it, I can wash my hands or Hamotzi with it. As a cup, does this have any Kedusha? No, it has no Kedusha. Good. Has it potential? It has potential. But if I take a look at this picture, of course, I chose the Sfaradi, the Adot Mizrach Sidor to use. Do you see something? You see Kedusha here. Yes, you see Kedusha. I could put a Sefer Torah, I could put a Chumash, I could put a Mezuzah, I could put Tefillin. All those things inherently have Kedusha because their purpose, their function in this world is somehow to connect me to Hashem. So when I take a look at this, there's nothing that blocks my view, so to speak, between it and its function to serve God. When you take a look at this, there is something that blocks my view. What's blocking it? I said that it's just a cup, and a cup has no kedusha. But I could use it to make kiddush. I could use it to wash my hands for hamotzi. I can use it for other things, and therefore raise it to a level of kedusha. But what blocks my view from it, but just being a cup, is what we call klipa. Klipa is a shell, a peel. So, for example, if I have an orange, I hold an orange in my hand, and I ask you, what is it? You'll know it's an orange. But you also know that I have to do something before I can eat it. I have to peel it away. Can you see the actual fruit? You can't. The fruit is really what's inside. The klipa is what covers that orange. It's relatively light. It's relatively easy to peel it away and get to that fruit. This cup, which represents nothing other than something that's not kedusha, is what we would call sitra achra. Now, sitra achra is used colloquially to mean the devil. It's used to mean the Yetzer Hara, which is fine, but we're not going to define that at all. We're going to define it only as it's not kedusha. It's the other side. There's one side that's kadosh, kedusha, holiness, and the other side is everything else. The fact that it has the ability to be raised means that klipa is translucent, using a term that we'll see later. That I can't really see it now, but I can maybe peel it away and use it for something and raise it to something of kedusha. The last term I want you to know is what's called klipat noga. Klipat noga is just what I described now. It is this luminescent klipa or translucent klipa that I can, it right now is a klipa. I see only a cup, but the fact is that I can affect change here. I can do something to make this usable to a level of kedusha, as opposed to, for example, a non-kosher animal. Non-kosher animal C falls into a different category of klipa, a different type of klipa. Right now, we're going to talk about two things. Sitra achra, the other side, i.e., that which is not kedusha, and klipa, okay, and that which is covering something that is, in fact, not kadosh. Let's take a look at the text and come back to this commentary of Rav Steinsaltz. Okay, again, the Bayura Inyan al pi masha katav Rabbeinu Chaim Vital, delachol ish Yisrael echad tzadik ve'echad rasha yesh shtei neshamot yichtiv u'neshamot ani asiti shehen shtei nefashot nefesh achat. One of those nefashot Mitzad haklipa v'sitra achra. It is comes from the perspective of what we'll call forces of tuma. That's another way to talk about sitra achra, because if it's not kedusha, the opposite kedusha is tuma. When it comes to kedusha, there is no middle. There's no parv. There's no besari chalavi and parv. It's kedusha or tuma. It doesn't mean it makes you tamei. It doesn't make you ritually impure. It doesn't mean if you touch it, something's wrong with you. It's just not kedusha. So this nefesh bahamit comes from the tzad, or the side of klipa and sitra achra, vihi hamitlabeshet bedam ha'adam. Where is that neshama? That neshama is enclosed within the blood of, or within our blood, la'chayot haguf, and it gives life to our body, meaning our blood carries within it the nefesh bahamit, and that same blood is our life source. Ukedichtiv, as it says, ki nefesh habasar badam hi. The nefesh is of the body, the meat, the flesh is in the blood. Again, klipa is not evil. Klipa is what protects, not protects, what covers something from being kadosh. The nefesh bahamit has potential. But its potential right now is going to be used for something else. What? So take a look at what it says here now. Umimena baot kol hamidot raot me'arba yesodot ra'im sheba. It says that all the negative traits that we have within us all flow from the four basic elements of evil within us. What does that mean? Okay. Very fancy words, but we have to understand what's going on. So I'm going to come back to what Rav Steinsaltz says soon. I'll give you just a second to look at the slide. Earth, Wind, and Fire. Some of you may remember the band. We're going to talk about Earth, Wind, Fire, and more than that. You'll see water as well. I'm going to give you some background, and then we're going to look at it inside. The Admor HaZaken tells us that there are four elements in nature. Those four elements are present in us, and each one of those elements gives birth, so to speak, to various negative character traits we may have. Now, again, I will tell you, and he's going to say this later in this chapter, don't forget that the Nefesh HaBahamit has good stuff too. Right now, we're going to start with the negative. He tells us like this: what is fire in our body? What is that represented by? I'll read this. Once ignited by anger and pride, a man like fire soars aloft. Pride is the state. Remember, I talked to you, I think, this group class about a candle, the flame of a candle. So if you turn the candle upside down, the flame still always wants to go up. So too, pride is always like a candle, like fire. Anger too is an offshoot of pride. Would a person not be proud? He would not be angered when someone defied his will. That the element of fire gives us in our neshama the ability to get angry and the ability to feel a sense of pride. Not I'm happy. I'm not pride in like I'm proud of what I did, but gava, like overlording pride over somebody else. Like I'm better than you. That's fire. Water within our neshama, our nefesh bahamit. The water aspect is the ability of water to make pleasurable things grow, indicates that concealed within it is the element of pleasure. Again, when we see the text in a couple of minutes, this will also become clearer. Thus, the appetite for pleasure derives from the element of water. Wind, air, ruach. Wind or air is characterized by meaning nothing but wind. It lacks substance. One's frivolity and scoffing, boasting, idle talk all emanate from that same idea. It lacks any substance. I can understand why I might get angry, may have a reason to be angry and get something out of it. I can understand when I am boastful, I may get something out of it. I get nothing out of frivolity and scoffing and boasting and idle talk, and it's just mere considered like wind. And earth. Earth is the last yesod of the four yesodot, the last of the four elements. Earth is characterized by heaviness. A man is encumbered by sloth and melancholy, likewise senses a heaviness of the limbs. For those of you who go to my Mesilat Yesharim class, you'll know that we're talking about this very topic now. So let's go back now to understand what all this is. Let's go back to the text. Before we read inside, let's take a look. One more slide having to do with what Rav Steinsaltz tells us about this topic as an introduction of Sitra Achra and Sitra Kedusha. In very general terms, without going into any details, the world is divided into two parts. Sitra di Kedusha, Tzad HaKedusha, the side of holiness, V'Sitra Achra, and the Tzad HaAcher, the other side. Tzad HaKedusha hu Tzad sheshayach LaKadosh Baruch Hu, the side of holiness of things that are related to God. Shall kol mi shemakir bo umekabel et maruto. Everything that item, the tefillin, the mezuzot, the Shabbat candles, the things that are those nature, all represent the idea that we recognize and we accept Hashem's authority over us, so to speak. And they also represent how we connect to God. Sitra Achra, hu bemuvan miluli ad tzad acher. In the verbal way, it means that it's the other side. We don't, tzad kedusha we can say, but this is the other side. It doesn't say tzad tuma, even though we're going to use that term. Doesn't mean, it says the other side. It's just called acher. Klomar she'eno tzad kedusha. Bemuvan zeh, in this understanding, hatvisa hi she'en davar hu shehu neutrali. There's nothing neutral. Ben kedusha v'lo kedusha. Kol davar, everything. Oshu kedusha, oshu lo kedusha. It's either holy or it's not. V'mu'eno kedusha hu sitra achra. If it's not holy, it's sitra achra. Adam adavek b'Hashem hu b'tzad kedusha. A person who clings to God, who strives to be closer to God, he's acting on the side of kedusha. V'meino davek b'Hashem, and if not, hu sar mimenu v'hu b'tzad acher. He's on the other side. If not, you cannot be neutral. Either you're connected to God and you're with God, b'tzad shelo, on his side, or you're on the other side. If you're not in favor of, you're automatically against. Again, when it comes to kedusha, it is black and white. We're not talking halacha, we're not talking basar v'chalav, we're not talking feelings, we're not talking emotions, we're talking kedusha. It's either kedusha or it's not. So now, with all this, let's take a look at the text. Go back to here where it says, right here, umimena, and from this nefesh habahamit, he hasn't used the word yet, he will later. From this nefesh habahamit, ba'ot, kol amidot ra'ot, me'arba yisodot ra'im sheba. Flow from all those four yisodot or elements in our being, flow these four different areas of evil in us, or things that are bad character traits. Tahainu, they are kas v'ga'ava miyasoda esh shenigva lemala, anger and pride. Haughtiness is a better word, which are the yesod of fire. We saw this on the slide. Those always seek to go up. What is the purpose when a person acts haughty? What is the purpose of someone doing that? I want myself to look better. I want to be better than you. I feel I'm better than you. Maybe I don't feel it, but I want to show it. I want to be above you. In business world and in life, there are two ways to get ahead. You can either climb over somebody, or you can work with somebody to grow together. So when you climb over somebody in the figurative sense, look, you may do it in a very legitimate way. You're just better at your job. But when you lord over somebody, you say, I'm better than you. This is the idea of the yesod of esh, of fire. V'tavota ta'anugim, and desires for pleasure, miyesod hamayim. That comes from the yesod, of the element of water. Ki hamayim matzmichin kol minei ta'anug, because water causes things to grow that are ta'anug. What does that mean? The fruits and vegetables and other things within the world and life itself, which bring us pleasure. So therefore, the negative character traits that we have flow from the element of water. when it comes to desire for pleasure. V'holalut v'leitzanut v'hit pa'arut. When it comes to boastfulness, mockery, being actually playing all rowdy, udvarim betelim, and other just absolute wastes of time. Whoops, sorry. I should go like this. Misod haruach. That comes from the yesod, or the foundation, or the element of wind. Again, because wind represents a lack of anything. There's nothing there. V'atzlut v'atzvut misod ha'afar. The idea of laziness and sadness comes from afar, from the element of earth. Again, I want to digress for a second. And for those of you, some of you, it's a reminder. For some of you who already learned this in Mesiyat Yesharim with me or at somebody other time, he spends quite a bit of time on this particular section when it comes to the midah of zrizut. What is zrizut? So in English, you say alacrity, but there is no real exact word in English for zrizut, but it means to try to do something, to get to do the mitzvah as soon as you can do the mitzvah, to do it the best way possible. And he said that the one, and this is in the Ramchal says in Mesiyat Yesharim, that the one thing working against zrizut, the main thing, is the atzlut and atzvut, which come from the yesod of afar. Same basic idea. That our heaviness, our laziness, when we wake up in the morning and say, I'm not going to go to shul. I'll daven, but I'll just stay home. Or let someone else do that mitzvah. I don't need to be the first one there to do it. That is what works against us. And that's what this atzlut and this atzvut is that he's talking about here. Now, at this point, you could say, wait a minute. Ribono shel olam, I am really confused. We saw in the first chapter where the Admor HaZaken, the Alter Rebbe, was talking about, remember, this book is for Beinonim, meaning you and me, or at least me. And the way he defined Beinoni, you have no averot, nothing, not even having done a sin that is the smallest dirabanan. You haven't even overlooked someone who's doing an avera that you could have changed. You've helped them too. And then you come along and you tell me that I have this nefesh bahamit, that it causes me all these problems. I have all these negative things in me. I have the anger and the gava and the tavat ta'anugim and atzlut and atzvut. And like you said, like, what the heck? What am I supposed to do in life now? This can sound very depressing. So, parenthetical statement. In Sefer Dvarim, we read at the end of Parshat Kitavo for the second time, we read what is called the Tochacha. A myriad of curses that are made to the Bnei Yisrael that sound really bad. That if you do this wrong and this wrong and this wrong, all the horrible things are going to happen to you. And a person can say, like, how am I supposed to withstand this? This is terrible. So the next parasha is Nitzavim. It says, Aten Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem. It's not just a statement that the Jews were all standing there, but it's a statement from the Torah that in spite of all the potential things that could happen, you're still yatzib, you're still stable, we're still here, we're not going anywhere. In addition to that, that's on a national level. On a microcosmic level, on a personal level, take a look at Sefer Vayikra. You take a look at Sefer Vayikra, and it starts off, the first part has to do mostly with Kohanim and Levi'im. Okay, so if you're not a Kohen or Levi, it may not connect with as much. It's psukim in the Torah that you have to know, you have to understand. It's no different than Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. But as you move through Sefer Dvarim, Vayikra, and you come to Achremot, Kedoshim, and come to other parshiot that deal with how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to be kadosh, how we're supposed to connect to God, how we're supposed to be, and all the things, the korbanot that had to be brought when we didn't do the right thing. Once again, you can be despondent and say, how am I supposed to live up to the level of Kedusha that Hashem is telling me I have to live up to? It's not easy. It's not possible. So if you look at the end of Sefer Vayikra, there seems to be a pasuk before the last chapter that seems to be the perfect place to end Sefer Vayikra. Ela hadvarim v'abrit, the words it says, the hatorot, these are all the halachot, or the mitzvot that have to do with korbanot and Kedusha. I'm just paraphrasing. And then all of a sudden, there's this one parak that seems to just be hanging there. It's the parak that has to do with what's called arachim. Let's say I say in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, I want to give the value of my car to the Beit HaMikdash. I don't have a car, so it'd be zero. But let's say I had a car. It was worth 10,000 shekel. It's a junker. So I say, I'm going to give the value of my car to the Beit HaMikdash. So that's called the erech, the value of that item I have to now donate to the Beit HaMikdash. What if I say erki alai? I give my value to the Beit HaMikdash. And the Torah gives what the value is for a person, how much they would have to give Beit HaMikdash. What is that doing there? Again, it's to give encouragement. That after hearing all about the Korbanot, and the Korban Chatat, and Kedoshim Tiyu, and all the Averot that we have with problems with Arayot, and everything else, that the bar is set extremely high, I could feel very despondent. I could feel very negative about who I am and how I'm living my life. Comes along the Torah to say, Erki alai, I have a value to Hashem, no matter what. So at the very beginning of this book, I want to give you that same idea that this book is exactly the opposite of what may seem like to some of you who contacted me already in advance or before. It is not about trying to beat you over the head with a book of Musar, a book of you're bad and you're terrible and you're horrible. And look what you have, this animalistic soul, and you don't even realize you have a godly soul. It's not what the book's about at all. As a matter of fact, this animalistic soul, we're going to look at now, another couple of lines, and we're going to see just a little bit more about it. Top line. V'gam midot tovot shebeteva kol Yisrael betoldotam. Also within our godly soul, within our nefesh habahamit, within our animal soul, we have good character traits that are part of the nature and the DNA of a Jew from generation to generation. For example, Rachmanut. We are people who have mercy. We're merciful. Gomle chasadim. We all know this. The Jews are very good at doing chesed. Those come ba'ot mimena. They also come from the soul. But wait a second. Wait a second. Aren't those godly? Why wouldn't that be my godly soul? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but I need you to think about it for a minute. It's rhetorical because it's not going to become obvious for a while. It sounds like, and again, the way we normally would define things, that if I do something good, I do a chesed that came from my godly soul. And if I do something bad, it came from my animalistic soul. But again, I'm telling you again that we are not dividing into Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, animal soul, godly soul. That's not the division. That both my Yetzer Tov and my Yetzer Hara are within my nefesh habahamit, within my animalistic soul. Now, I understand that my animalistic soul is about me and my desires. So when I need to eat, which makes me live, and I need to sleep, and I need to relax, or I want to do something good or bad, it's about me. But when I do a chesed, why is that falling into the nefesh habahamit? When I'm a rachaman, when I have mercy on somebody, it's a rhetorical question right now because it's many chapters of answers. Okay, but I need you to think about that. Now let's take a look, a couple more lines of what he says about this right here. So again, that we are, the fact that we are rachamanim and gomle chasadim, ba'ot mimena, that also comes from our nefesh habahamit. Ki b'Yisrael nefesh zo de klipa, hi miklipat noga. Now, the neshama we're talking about, or the nefesh we're talking, the nefesh habahamit, has to it, around it, or comes from something called klipat noga. I mentioned to you before, there were two main types of klipa. I only mentioned one, and that's klipat noga, this illuminating klipa, this bright klipa. What does that even mean? There are actions that I take that ostensibly are good, right? If I take out the garbage, it's not a good or bad thing necessarily. If I'm taking out the garbage, if I come to your house and because you can't walk for some reason, I take out the garbage and I've done a mitzvah. I've helped you, which we call colloquially, it's a mitzvah. It's a chesed. That action there was a klipa taking out garbage. There's a klipa, which, what does that mean? Someone looks at me, is he saying, who is he doing a mitzvah? No, he's not doing a mitzvah per se. There's nothing kadosh about that. But once that klipa is removed, by doing something and elevating that, I've changed that action to something that is kadosh, and I'm able to move it. It still emanates out of the nefesh habahamit. And again, I repeat the question, and I'm going to repeat it many times until we find the answer. Why is that still my nefesh habahamit and not nefesh elokit? Rhetorical question. Continuing. Again, he says this has come from the klipa shemi klipat noga sheyesh ba gam kein tov. It also has some good within that klipa. If you ever open up an orange or a grapefruit and you take up the klipa, sometimes you'll find that one of the wedges is no good, right? So in a sense, some's good and some's not good. So when it comes to klipat noga, I'm using a very simplistic meaning right now. Same idea. V'hi misod eitz hadat tovara. Where does this neshama come from? The nefesh habahamit. He says its source was the eitz hadat tovara. The eitz hadat that we know, the tree of knowledge found in the first chapter of the very beginning of Sefer Bereshit. Now you'll note that he started off this chapter talking about the Jews, that the Jews have two neshamot. I'm going to read the last few lines. This is the only time, if I can remember correctly, the only time in the entire book he talks about the non-Jewish world in any depth. He may references here and there, but for the most part, this is the only time he makes a blanket statement. I'm not going to explain it tonight. It's going to leave you with like, huh? But I want to read it to you. As opposed to the Jews, when it comes to the neshamot of the non-Jewish world, now yes, ovdei gilulim mean idolaters. Right now I'm just going to loosely translate it as non-Jews. Hein mishar klipot tmeot. Their neshama, shein bahem tov klal, their neshama comes from what we will call later gimel klipot hatuma, which is a level of tum'ah that cannot be brought to a level of kedusha. A non-Jew cannot bring something to kedusha. Now, hold on one second. This is again Reb Chaim Vital's comment. All the good the non-Jews do, the garmayu avdin, they do it for themselves. I'm going to give you a loose translation of these last few lines. We will spend 5 minutes on it only next week because it does not affect our understanding of the book, but it is important to understand it because it's taken out of context in other books, in other writings. And it says when they read this, someone would say, I'm never going to read Tanya because look what he does and says about the Goyim. Okay. It's important to understand this last part of the paragraph very much so. But just to kind of the saken, we saw tonight an introduction to the concept of nefesh habahamit and nefesh elokit. He spoke in depth about nefesh habahamit. We saw that it contains within it yetzer tov and yetzer hara. Nefesh habahamit, nefesh elokit represent two distinct me's that will become a little bit more clear as we move along. The nefesh elokit is only about getting closer to God. The nefesh habahamit is everything else. It has to do with all my needs, my desires, even the mitzvot I do, the chesed I do. We also talked briefly about the non-Jewish world, which he says, it didn't say clearly, it has only one neshama, and it comes from klipot hatmeot, has a different perspective. And the reason that the nefesh habahamit has the potential to do good is because the klipa that surrounds the nefesh habahamit is klipat noga, or comes from klipat noga, which has within it, by definition, good and bad. Next week, what I want to do, Bezrat Hashem, is we're going to spend just, like I say, 5 minutes on what this last paragraph means. I mean, for example, what about the Chasidei Umot HaOlam? We know that non-Jews saved thousands of Jewish lives. Take a look at Oscar Schindler, Zichrono Livracha, right? It's interesting. I don't know if any of you have ever been to his grave. I was there.
That's definitely not a counterexample because he did it for his own money. He made money.
He did it for his own money. Okay. I'm still going to use him as an example. I'm still going to use him as an example. Okay, we could talk about,
the problem is Gerut.
what's his name? Raoul Wallenberg. We could talk about many, many Chasidei Umot Haolam. But just as an
Yes.
aside, if you take a look, if you've ever been to the grave of Oskar Schindler, you'll be able to find it very easily. It's a gigantic cemetery, non-Jewish cemetery. It is the only grave that has many, many, many stones on top of the grave because Jews come visit him. But so what about Chasidei Umot Haolam? I mean, what do you mean they do it for? What do you mean they have only Glimot Klipot Tatmeot? How does that work? We'll talk about
How
that.
does Gerut work?
What?
If the Goyim only have the 3 Klipot Tumah, how is Gerut even possible?
Oh, very good. Excellent. What about a Ger? Right. How does that happen? Okay. Do
How
me a
does that
favor.
happen?
Wait, do me a
Yes.
favor. Next week, remind me that question. Okay. After we talk about this last few lines, we'll talk about that question because I heard a beautiful answer. Okay. I will share that with you next week, Bezrat Hashem. So after you look about the non-Jewish world, we'll talk about that question. We'll do a little bit of a summary of this chapter, and then we will start to do an introduction to the next parak about the Nefesh Elokit, which is something that is a very different idea than most are used to. I will wish you all a good evening. For those of you in Mesilat Yesharim class, it's only online tomorrow as opposed to usual where it's online and in person because they expect the weather. Baruch Hashem. And I'll see you all Bezrat Hashem next week. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Good evening.
Mr. Koach.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Great.
Thank you. Very good. Wow,
Let me close this.
that was good.